Welcome to Africa's Big Switch. On this episode, we had a conversation with Toni Sanni, the head of corporate finance and venture capital at the Emerging Africa Group. Toni is a financial services expert with an academic background in accounting and finance from the University of Bristol and the London School of Economics. Her diverse experience includes roles at private equity firms and corporate finance divisions of major companies such as Verod Capital and Deloitte. Toni's experience and expertise in buy and sell side roles has shaped her international career, focusing on significant capital transactions in emerging markets. This is Africa's Big Switch.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Africa's Big Switch podcast, where we speak to creative solution providers working in Africa or for the African continent and its development. Today, we have the wonderful and exceptional Toni Sanni joining us to share her experiences, knowledge, and probably give us some tips and insights on how we can, further African development. Hi, Toni. It's so lovely to have you. Thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you so much for having me on here as well. It's pleased to be here.
Awesome. So we're going to jump right in and we're just going to ask really quickly if you could tell us about your background. So you have a very interesting journey and have chosen some very interesting sectors to exist and thrive in. And we would love for you to share a bit of how that happened, what you studied in school, and then what led you to pick the niches that you are existing and thriving in right now.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the compliment. So I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, but I know sometimes I do go on. So yeah, my background is in corporate finance. I studied accounting and finance as my first degree at the University of Bristol. Funny enough, I actually initially thought I was going to study engineering, aeronautic engineering to be specific, which is completely different to corporate finance or anything finance based. But and that was partially because, I grew up in Nigeria, and in Nigeria, I don't know if you know this, but you're separated into like specific classes, so sciences, arts, and social sciences. And at the time, I really enjoyed math. And if you really liked math or were good at math, they would most times automatically put you in the science class. And so I studied the sciences, physics, chemistry, biology. And I thought airplanes were cool. And I was like, okay, I would be an engineer because I like math. And what's one of the, I guess, most interesting areas of engineering I could look at? Oh, aeronautic engineering, aerospace engineering. And that really drove me. So in my A levels as well, I took math for the math and physics. And then I actually took the SATs as well because I wanted to study in the US. There's most, courses for aeronautic engineering are typically in the US. So I thought I was going to go to the US. I applied to a couple of schools. I got in. And I think the summer before I was meant to go, I just realized that, I think I had this like epiphany that why do I actually want to study this aeronautic engineering? Is it something I want, or is it something that I kind of have just been pushed into all my life? And I realized that I didn't really know why I wanted to do it. I even took a like design and technology course that summer because I was like, okay, let me prepare for what it's going to be like in engineering. And I did well at it, but I didn't really enjoy it. And I figured that, okay, this is what the next 4 years or 4 or 5 years of my life are going to be like. And if I'm not enjoying it, is this really the path for me? So I then started asking questions, asked a lot of my mentors from school, asked my mom, and I really wanted to know what are the other options you could have with mathematics background. And that was when I discovered, finance or actuarial sciences. And essentially, I realized that with math, you could actually excel in finance. I had kind of shied away from finance before because my mom, that's the background which my mom was in or is in. And I kind of didn't want it to just be like, oh, I'm just doing this because of, my family. But then I was like, you know what, I could just check it out and try an internship and see if it's something I would be more interested in. So I got an internship, a brief internship at an investment bank. And then this was in Nigeria. And then I did it for about 8 weeks, and I actually really enjoyed it. Um, I really, really enjoyed it. I like the people, I like the pace, I like the fact that you get to work with several companies across several sectors. So you're not really just confined to one particular niche or one particular sector. And last minute, I just decided, okay, what can I do? If I wanted to get into investment banking, what do I need to study? And that was how last minute I started looking for schools that I could apply to within the UK to study accounting and finance. And so I got into Bristol, even though it was very last minute because I had gotten really good grades with my A-level courses. And that was how I ended up at Bristol. And then I did my 3 years there after my A-levels. I enjoyed it, I excelled at it, and I came out, with a really good degree. Um, and then, yeah, I decided to do a master's again just because I enjoyed corporate finance so much. And, I have this thing where if I want to do something, I don't necessarily have to make money from it, but I am going to be the best at it. I'm going to excel at it. So when I wanted to do accounting and finance, the best school in my mind was LSE, right, to study finance. But because it was such a last minute decision, there were no places at LSE for me to go and have an undergrad degree at. So when I was going to do my master's, I already said in my mind that, oh, I wasn't able to go in here for my first degree, but I am going to go here for my master's. And so I went to the LSE, I applied, I got in, and I did my master's there. And then I did a couple of internships in investment banking. But what I realized was that with investment banking, it's very fast paced, but essentially you're helping companies raise capital, right, across different sectors, but you're not really staying long term or medium term with these companies, right? So you help them raise capital, you work with them for 3 to 4 months, sometimes 6 months, sometimes even a year, but then you're out. And then I realized that I want to make more of an impact with these companies or with these businesses. I want to actually help them grow and help them develop and be part of their growth story. And that was how I discovered private equity. I had some mentors as well from school who helped me really see what you can do with a background in private equity and how you can get into that space. But I think I'm going on and on right now, so I'll just stop there. But essentially, that was my journey from school all the way to my first degree and my master's. My advice just from that story would just be, in anything you're going to do, especially as young people, going after a career, just make sure that you actually know the reason why you're moving towards this career. And it's not just that you're being pushed essentially, even from a young age. And it's never too late to change courses. It's another piece of advice I'll give. It's really never too late. I know someone who studied medicine, did the full, I think, 8 years or 9 years in the UK, qualified as a doctor, and now is going back to get a law degree because he realized that he had just been pushed all his life towards medicine, but that was not truly where his passion is. And, I encourage him all the time. So yeah, that would be my piece of advice. That's essentially my background and how I was led into investment banking and now private equity.
Honestly, this is just the beginning, and we're already gaining so much insight. Like, honestly, like that's great advice. That's one thing I keep trying to like remind myself, like, try not to get stuck into somewhere because
Exactly.
so many people stay stuck into like places they don't like, and then years down the line they wish they had tried something else. Like, interesting enough, like I've heard of somebody that went from like an agriculture background into like a tech background where like they're coding and things like that. So it's like the shift is possible no matter what. But yes,
Exactly.
really good advice. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to ask more on like your like background, your entry or like your continuation of corporate finance. Like what was it about corporate finance that you like so much?
That's a very good question. So when I was studying accounting and finance, right, with the accounting aspect, you're dealing with most times the past experience or the past occurrences within a company or a business. So you're dealing with the financial statements, the financials of the business operations, but essentially recognizing and recording events I would say, or transactions that have occurred in the past, within the lifespan of the business or the company. So it has to do a lot with the past. And what I noticed with corporate finance is most times, a lot of times, you're looking more at how can I predict or project the future of this business, right? How I think this business is going to go, how I think this business can grow. So it had a lot to do with forecasting and projecting and predictions. And I really enjoyed that aspect. I like being able to see, okay, what can we do to grow a business, or how can I predict or project how this business is going to go based on using the information I now have, the financials I now have from the past. Can I project or predict how this business is going to grow? And I found that extremely interesting. I also liked, being able to essentially, if you take a career in corporate finance, most times you will end up in an area, like especially if you pursue investment banking, where you are essentially an intermediary between companies and investors, right, and helping them to raise capital. And I love the idea of, particularly coming from Nigeria, an emerging market where a lot of businesses, or a lot of entrepreneurs with amazing ideas and amazing initiatives need capital. I love the idea of being in a position where I could help them raise capital or raise much needed capital for their businesses. And that essentially, drove my drive to, take corporate finance much more seriously and really focus more on that aspect. I still love, I still enjoyed the accounting aspect, and I got a lot of key learnings from that. But yeah, the corporate finance aspect was what really drew me in, for those reasons.
Yeah, that's really good. And just out of curiosity, like, because it sounds a lot like private equity. Do they intertwine, or like, what's the difference between like the corporate finance side and the private equity side?
That's an amazing question. I guess in simple terms, the skill sets are very similar. The skill sets to work in investment banking and work in private equity are very similar. Essentially a background in corporate finance or some kind of knowledge of corporate finance and the debt and equity, and how debt and equity essentially work in a business, right? But the difference is that most times from the investment banking side and how you would work with the private equity side is that from the investment banking side, you would be more the sell side, right? So you're working with a business that wants to raise debt or wants to raise equity, essentially. And who do I approach? I approach the equity investors. Who are the equity investors? In this case, the equity investors are the private equity guys, right? So the private equity guys are on the buy side, what we call the buy side, because they are buying the business, right? You are trying to help the company sell their equity in the business. So you're on the buy side. They're the ones buying that equity in the business. So they're on the sell side. So you're relating a lot. Oftentimes you have people move across both, sectors, because it's the same skill sets and you also have the same networks. A lot of times your friends, they're your, they're your peers across the industry. But essentially one side is the side trying to sell the equity and the other side is the side that is buying the equity.
Like the whole conversation for me has been very interesting in terms of like the decisions that you've made and the things that have helped you make these decisions, these switches, and being able to transfer skills from one space to the other. And so just to kind of give the rest of us, a bit of context, I think you have touched on an overview. I feel like you've highlighted a bit of what the Emerging Africa Group does, but if you could just like summarize, who is the Emerging Africa Group? What is it? What is its goal, mission? What does it hope to achieve for Africa? And how has it evolved over the years since inception?
Thank you. So the Emerging Africa Group, we're a leading investment bank in Nigeria. Our aim essentially is to be a source of capital funding or capital raising for governments, parastatals, as well as private and institutional clients who are seeking to raise capital, essentially, or seeking to place capital for innovative ideas and businesses. So we operate across multiple subsidiaries right now, including asset management. So our asset management team works with institutions and even HNIs to help them place spare funds that they have within very profitable instruments or funds so that they can then generate returns on them. We have our Trust Services Department division, which essentially, again, works with institutions as well as private individuals who want to establish, a trust, trust funds essentially, or establish a trust partnership with a trustee that would essentially be in charge of managing their assets on behalf of, might be your children, it might be shareholders in the company, essentially provide trustee services. A lot of them are from a law background. We also have our financial advisory and investment banking division, which I head. And essentially, as I mentioned, we act as an intermediary between investors who have capital and are looking for businesses or companies to invest in, and the businesses and companies that are seeking this capital and come to us or approach us and say, okay, we want to raise debt or we want to raise equity, and we help them structure it in the best possible way based on how the market is going and based on how their business is going and what their business can afford to do at this point in time. And then we approach our investors as well and help them, ensure that the transaction is successful and closed, but both sides of both ends of the transaction are protected adequately. And so also follow through after investments, making sure that, it's a debt instrument, for example, through which the transaction, the funds were raised, following through to making sure that all repayments are adequately made and, investors are satisfied with their investments. We also have the venture capital division, which is the most recent division that I also head. And the purpose of that division is to essentially launch 2 funds, one of which has just recently been launched, which is our technology fund that is aimed at deploying capital, much needed capital to technology aligned and focused businesses across Pan-Africa. The fund is a $50 million fund, and it's aimed at deploying capital towards businesses across 6 regions. So that includes Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Francophone West Africa, including Cameroon, Togo, and the Ivory Coast. We also have our fintech business, Fondo, which is a digital payment and savings platform that is also headed by its own team. We also have 2 microfinance businesses across microfinance banks, essentially across the north and the southern region of Nigeria, because we're really trying to target those unbanked populations within the country. And then, we have a couple of other smaller SPVs or initiatives, but essentially we're a financial services group in Nigeria, that is really just trying to be a one-stop shop for both investors that are looking to place capital and businesses that are looking to raise capital. We're also very ESG focused and ESG conscious because of the initiatives and goals of our shareholders and stakeholders. We've won multiple awards over the years for being one of the most conscious ESG investment firms in the country, which we are really, really proud of. We are one of the first leading investment banks to have all our operations across the country, all our locations across the country be fully powered by solar powered systems. We also, have smaller ESG focused initiatives like reusable or recyclable water sources within our buildings. We use e-cards, for example, as opposed to plastic, as opposed to paper, the traditional paper cards as well, and a couple of other initiatives. But essentially, that's who we are. That's what we're trying to achieve. And, we're very confident that we are going to continue to grow. Also, just a testament to how much we've grown. We've only been in operations for 6 years, but in those 6 years, as of end of H1 this year, we had raised in transaction value just under $1.3 billion for our clients over the past 6 years. And we are hoping, and we know that we're hoping for that number to double ideally by next year. And we're hoping to keep growing and keep expanding across not only Nigeria, but Pan-Africa.
A lot of big numbers and a lot of doubling in a short amount of time. So we're definitely going to be looking out for that. But this conversation is definitely piquing my interest in just the investment landscape in Africa as a continent, but in Nigeria as a whole, because there's so much about financial literacy and just, everybody wants to be aware but it seems like there's a lot that goes into it, and that's evidenced by how your company has thrived. And something that I found interesting was the ESG focus, which you talked about a little bit. And I have two questions on that. One, what motivated the shift to, or what motivated the choice to be an ESG focused, investment group? And two, what does it mean to be an ESG, like focused investment group in like practical terms for Nigeria and maybe the other countries that you have ties and business with?
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's also a really good question. And thanks for the compliments to our business or the company. So in terms of the ESG focus, I'll take it in two buckets, right? So the first bucket in which we try to be ESG focused is, in terms of the environmental aspect. So, sustainability towards the environment. And that shift towards that, I would say it's a general shift that we've seen all across the world globally. And so, just looking at the future of our planet essentially and wanting to maintain our planet and keep our planet, for as long as possible, and in the best condition that we can leave it, for the next and upcoming generations. And so aside from even our own senior management having those desires, even our shareholders, right, even our stakeholders, a lot of times, with a lot of investment banks and financial services companies in Africa, there's a lot of ties and links as well to ESG focused impact groups across the world. A lot of DFIs that we work with in many ways, or we have connections with, also have those desires and have those drives. And so as stakeholders in your company, you have to also learn from them and take those into consideration. And so those, that really was, what drew the shift to, what motivated the shift towards being more ESG focused in terms of the environmental aspect. And another aspect in which we are very impact focused, I would say, is also in the gender lens of things. And for example, our company is one of the few companies where senior management, the amount of females in senior management is actually a greater proportion than the males. And so we have about 55% of the senior management team being women, a similar proportion for our board members shareholders, I'm not too sure, but board members. And there's always been that gender lens focus for us, particularly because we are, majority owned and led by a woman. Who also has that drive to empower other women across Nigeria and eventually Africa. No matter what we want to say, female entrepreneurs and female businesses in Nigeria are still severely underserved in comparison to their male counterparts. And so we, take that into consideration, not only in our own operations, but also in our products and services. For example, the technology fund I mentioned, at least 20% of it has to be deployed to female-led and female-owned businesses based on the DIFC standards. And that's at least. So the target will be for much more than that. But we're essentially already setting aside a bucket just for those. We also have a female entrepreneurship desk within our company that applies or caters to providing, capital for MSMEs that are female-led within the country. And we've worked with a lot of female entrepreneurs on their, even on the small scale level. I'm talking about MSMEs that are, valued at 5 million naira and below, that are just trying to raise very small levels of capital. So yeah, that's the second drive that we have in our company. And I think that we are excelling at both, but we are, still hoping to grow within those areas.
Thank you so much, Toni. I think that it is timely, imperative, and excellent that your company has an ESG focus with the zero waste agenda, and just, everything that's been going on with climate change. I think it would be very great for our continent to take more active steps, in this field, especially in the business world. So whilst I love our country, I know that the investment space, one for the average man is a very mystical space, but
Exactly.
I know that it exists. And so just taking it from the perspective of the mystery, of investments in Africa, what are some of the biggest challenges you and your company have faced existing and trying to, build within the African investment ecosystem? And how have you overcome them?
Okay. I would say, well, right now, just speaking in current terms, one of the challenges that, not just us, but I would say a lot of um, financial service providers and even just business owners and manufacturers are facing right now in the country, and I think in other areas of Africa as well, is the FX risk or currency risk challenge. So you know that, over the past year or so, we've had a very volatile currency that, it's often difficult to predict movements, and we've had severe spikes in the FX movements that have really affected, returns for shareholders and investors who oftentimes invest in FX. So they invest in foreign currency, and of course, they expect their returns back in foreign currency. So a lot of times you might have, or we do have businesses doing very well in terms of garnering returns in Nigerian currency in the Naira. But by the time you convert that to the USD, essentially a lot of those returns might end up being eroded. And that's a big risk that shareholders are now very conscious of, foreign shareholders, investors are conscious of. And it's unfortunate that, it is sometimes not because of the doings of the entrepreneurs or business owners, but unfortunately, it's an effect that they are facing the consequence of which they are facing the consequences. One way that we do try to mitigate this, though, and we have seen mitigation in this, is hedging. So we use various instruments to hedge against this risks, both natural and in terms of derivatives that we acquire from our partners across the world. So when I say natural hedges, I mean businesses also naturally trying to move away from being import based or import focused and trying to produce more or seek out more supply chain sources closer to home that essentially wouldn't necessarily be affected by sudden spikes in imports in FX changes. Also with derivatives, you're essentially now able to fix your certain input prices, at least for a period of time, and that also helps. We also just have to keep, expecting, progress in the macroeconomic space of the country, hopefully as a result of some of these reforms that have been taken. Again, some of these things do take time to see the positive, effects towards, and, we're hoping for the best. Investors are also very aware of what is going on within the country. And so, usually during the investment space or negotiation space, that is taken into account. So that's one way, at least now, they're getting used to that FX risk, and it's taken into account. But it has been a challenge over the past year, particularly for a lot of businesses, including financial services businesses operating across Nigeria. I would say another challenge is the risk appetite of investors. Again, as a result of this FX risk, as well as certain instabilities that macro instabilities like inflation or interest rate movements that have affected the operations of businesses. Investors are more cautious towards investing in Nigeria and Africa and some other countries within Africa. And unfortunately, what you have being left is a lot of dry powder. And when I say dry powder, I mean there's capital on the table, especially within a lot of equity investors. But the businesses just don't meet the qualifications or criteria for these investors anymore, because our risk appetite has gotten lower, and the requirements for businesses to scale through in order to acquire capital have become more stringent, and a lot of businesses are not able to meet those requirements anymore. And so we're left with a lot of dry powder. Again, we in emerging Africa, we note these challenges in the real sector, and we do try to have, favorable terms in place that still protect our investors, but also not as stringent that small SMEs are not able to pass through. For example, you have some investors that won't give you capital without you bringing a bank guarantee. And even to get a bank guarantee, the bank themselves won't give you the capital unless you bring collateral. So it's like you need collateral to get a loan or to get an investment. So it's literally a cycle, right? And it becomes more and more difficult to raise this capital. So we, for example, won't necessarily request a bank guarantee, but a lot of investors will. I think another challenge again is just, also the interest rates movements across the country over the past year. Again, to tackle a lot of the inflationary pressures that we've seen in the country, the monetary policies rates has continued to be set as increasing rates. And unfortunately, it has made it very expensive to raise debt in the country. And so unfortunately, what has happened is that whereas a lot of businesses would be able to raise money from the debt capital markets, it has made it very unattractive to raise debt. And unfortunately, businesses are suffering because of that, because they're not able to go to the debt capital markets to raise the needed capital, to improve productivity within the country that would in turn, lessen the pressures that we are feeling. So it's like a cycle, right? The economy is not growing as fast as you would like it to grow. Inflation is growing, you raise interest rates. Unfortunately, businesses that would have borrowed money to grow their businesses and put more money back into the economy now don't have those resources. And they are also, unfortunately, now not growing in a way that would have helped the economy grow, right? So there's a lot of arguments towards it, but that has also made, been a challenge for a lot of operators within the past year. But again, one way we look at things is, every challenge also poses an opportunity for growth, right? So for example, with the debts, the interest rate situation, high interest rates, we are seeing a lot of businesses now move towards raising equity as opposed to debt. And so they are approaching a lot of investment bankers to raise equity for them, or to, whether that's through an IPO, a rights issuance, or a private placement. And that's another opportunity that we have, taken advantage of to help, approach our equity investors and say, you know what, there's opportunities now in the equity markets. And, there's always, I always say every challenge poses an opportunity. So at least there's a bright side towards it. And hopefully within the medium term future, we can see some of these challenges alleviated.
You literally took the question out of my mouth, because I was going to ask you about the opportunities, but then you've already delivered it, which I'm actually very grateful for. But then I guess another aspect could be in terms of financing solution. So what types of financing solution does Emerging Africa Group offer? And how do they cater for the different sectors in terms of these solutions?
Thank you. So we offer everything, I would say everything really, because now we do venture capital as well. Or maybe not private equity, but venture capital. So we offer traditional debts and equity capital market financing. So if let's say you're a business that wants to come to the debt capital market, so you want to raise via a CP or a promissory note, or even a bond, we can help bring you to the debt capital markets to raise that. If you're trying to raise equity, maybe through an IPO or a private placement, maybe approaching some private equity investors or investors to place with you privately, or even through a rights issue to your already existing shareholders, we can also bring you to the market and help you raise that. We work on M&A transactions as well. So if you're trying to merge or acquire another business, whether for your own growth or because of financial challenges, we can also help you with that. We also work on project finance transactions. So if you're trying to fund a project, whether it's an infrastructure project or a power project, oftentimes these are for, parastatal entities or, oil and gas or power sector operators. We can also help you raise capital for that. We also work on private debt transactions. So if you're trying to raise debt, but not necessarily through the bond market, so maybe you want to just raise a private facility from a bank or a debt investor, we can also help you with that. As I mentioned, we have the recently launched Venture Capital Technology Fund. So if you are a technology company business that aligns with the criteria that the fund has to invest, we can also bring you to the venture capital fund for investment consideration. We also have an SME desk. I mentioned the female entrepreneurship desk. So if you're an MSME, so a small business operator, and that is female-led or female-owned, and you're trying to raise a very small level of capital, like 5 million naira, I think typically 10 million naira below, we can also bring you to that desk for investment consideration. Like I mentioned, we have our asset management team, our trust team, our treasury team. We pretty much do everything. And that essentially is what our aim is, to be a one-stop shop for all your financial needs. Yeah, so that's pretty much what we do. And the amazing thing is, like I mentioned at one point, we can work with businesses across various sectors. So we've worked with businesses in the power sector, in the tech sector, in the telecommunication sector, in the FMCG sector, in the healthcare sector, across all sectors. Even more recently, we have a client in the education sector as well. And it's really beautiful because, as for people working within the company, you're really exposed to so many industries, and you learn and grow so much. And for us as well, we really do know that we are making an impact, across most of the sectors in Nigeria.
And just to also follow up on that as well. So how did these companies get your services? Do they apply, or do you find them and then reach out to them? What's the process like?
That's a great question. So for the larger businesses, oftentimes they would have their own advisor, right? So a financial advisor or some sort of advisor. So let's say you're a relatively large healthcare provider or hospital, you will most likely have an advisor that will bring your information memorandum, or sort of like a pitch deck, essentially, or a deck, bring it to us, or teaser, bring it to us and bring you to the table. So I have these guys trying to raise capital. But again, not everybody can afford to have those financial advisors. So sometimes as well, it's just meetings. Someone might pick up the phone and call me and say, oh, my friend has this company and they're trying to raise this capital. I'm not sure, let's take a meeting. Obviously, I would ask, very early stage questions. How long have they been in operation, to see if, it's something that we can look at. So I would say also proprietary research. So sometimes we know that, oh, this is what is going on in the country right now. These are the sectors that would be, looking to raise capital. For example, there was a recently announced bank recapitalization from the CBN in Nigeria. And so a lot of banks we know now are trying to raise capital to meet those requirements, the capitalization requirements. So we know that, oh, right now banks are looking for capital. So of course we're reaching out to a lot of banks, right? Approaching a lot of banks, because we know that they are potential clients. Sometimes as well, there might be an auction process. So when there's a really large company, let's say, for example, but I'm not saying that's the case, but let's say like Dangote is trying to engage in an M&A, right? So it's an auction process that their investment bank would put out, right? That, oh, this client might come to the market. Everyone sending your proposals if you want to either act as their financial advisor or be part of the transaction in some way or invest in some way. So we then send our proposals, right, based on that. So like an RFP essentially is sent out. That also happens. So there's multiple ways, but really even just word of mouth or referrals from, colleagues or peers or friends, also is a way through which these businesses approach us. So we also have our website as well, that has a contact page, and oftentimes as well we do get information requests and meeting requests from those as well. So there's multiple ways.
Honestly, it's good to know, because sometimes like knowledge is actually power, because people don't really know this is the way to go about it, and also explaining the different ways people can approach the company and stuff like that. Because sometimes people can quite be intimidated and be like,
exactly.
But then you never know. You actually never know.
Yeah. But I think one great thing I'm seeing amongst young people, I'm so sorry to cut you off, is that they are more and more confident, because you go for conferences, young people approach you and say, oh, this is my pitch deck, this is what I have this, and they are getting less and less intimidated. So I always say approaching or reaching out is the easy step, is the easy process, and you never know, right? If you don't try. So I would say at least what I'm seeing amongst young people is that we're more and more confident, especially because a lot of people that work, your friend might be, you never know, someone you went to school with might be working in one of these institutions.
Yeah, thanks. First things first, shout out to Gen Z. Of course, we're confident. But also I'm just curious, and this may be like a very basic question. But if someone walked up to you in a conference or something and gave their elevator pitch, what would you look out for? Because I feel like a lot of businesses, especially small businesses, feel like maybe they don't have what it takes to even be considered. But what would you consider?
So I think one thing I look out for, a couple of things. One thing is experience. And when I say experience, I don't mean experience in like, oh, how many years of operation, how many years have you been working at this business or working on this business? Because again, a lot of people are young people, like myself, if you like. But when I say experience, I mean, is this your first startup, for example? Is this your first foray into being an entrepreneur? Or have you done other sorts of entrepreneurship initiatives or projects, even if they didn't work out? Because a lot of times you find a lot of founders have had past, initiatives that didn't work out. So I want to know, do you have experience in being an entrepreneur? Not necessarily within this field you're just talking about. Then if you don't even have experience within this field, eventually I would want to know, you might not have experience, but are you willing to have a board of advisors, of people that do have experience? Because whether or not you like it, an investor would want to see that, at least within your board, there's well-experienced people. I also like to see that it's not just one person running calling all the shots because of, key man risk, something we call key man risk. Unfortunately, what we've seen a lot of times is that, if a business is only dependent on one particular person, and there's things that could happen, right? The person could unfortunately fall ill, move away, or again, just even because of having diversity of ideas, right? So I want to see that at least you're two or more founders. I'd also want to see, because it's an elevator pitch, there are other things I would want to see, but if it's a 5-minute pitch, I would say those two things. Also, just seeing the passion and drive that you have for this. Because one thing I also look out for is to see that, okay, these funds that are going to be given to you are not going to be misappropriated. And one way in which I say, do you actually have a passion for what you're talking about, what you're saying, and what you're doing? So if these funds are given, are you going to actually use them for this business initiatives or business ideas? And also, if it's an elevator pitch, unfortunately, if I can see that you're just pitching for maybe an investor that wants to cash out. And when I say cash out, I mean that we have buyout capital and we have growth capital, right? So am I giving you money just in replacement? So to buy out shares from another investor, in which case no money is going into the growth of this actual business. I wouldn't necessarily be as interested in those kind of, pitches, as opposed to a pitch where, okay, the money I'm putting in is actually growth capital, right? So it's actually to grow the business in so and so way. Maybe it's for expansionary plans, or it's for to hire new people or hire new employees. So essentially grow the business in some way. Those are the things I kind of look out for. There's a whole other checklist of, requirements, but if it's an elevator pitch, those things I look out for. And oftentimes, a lot of times, I would never decline to give you my card or at least the contact information for how you can reach me and my team.
That was a really good response, to be honest. Because like Sandy mentioned, it can be very intimidating, but it's good to know that especially that passion, like if you're not like dedicated to like what you're doing, like it's going to be really hard to like convince someone else. So if you're not convinced yourself, then there's no point, to be honest. But and then I actually want to ask you, like, let's say like maybe with a few examples now. Do you have any like notable projects where like the Emerging Africa Group has played like a pivotal role in like financing? Like, do you have any like examples where you've seen like the outcome has been so great and it's just like encouraging, like, yes, let's do more of this kind of thing?
Yes. There have definitely been some. So more recently, we worked and were able to finalize, it was a state government bond. So for the Bauchi state government, we helped them raise about 40 billion naira as a private bond essentially in the debt capital markets. And it was very rewarding, but I would also say it was a difficult transaction, and just in terms of the market right now, not because of the state. There's a lot going on in the market. As I mentioned, interest rates have been raised like 2 times now. There's a lot of in what's the word, uncertainty, and so raising capital from the debt capital market right now from investors is quite a challenge sometimes. But we were able to close the transaction after many months. And I actually was in Bauchi a couple of times, and it was amazing to see, because I was actually able to see some of the projects that the funding was being used for, including like flyover bridges, roundabouts, also what's the word, conservation centers. And I actually saw some of the children that were coming there like daily to watch the projects being like constructed. And I think those kind of pinch me moments, because you're actually seeing the funds being used, right? I also know that we've also worked on with an IPP, so that's an independent power provider, who was trying to seek a partnership with a state government, because they wanted to essentially build a power plant within their states that would be acting as a standalone power provider for a lot of residents within the state. And I know when they first came to us, it sounded like, a very, very, what's the word? It sounded like a far reach, just in terms of what they were trying to accomplish and try to achieve. I mean, they had no political connections or anything like that, but they just had these aspirations and these dreams. The guy had, experience working in the power sector, and he said, see, I'm seeing all these opportunities, particularly within my state. And they eventually were able to bring them to the states. They secured a PPP with the states, because, as a lot of states are also underserved. A lot of people in Nigeria right now, in terms of power, are severely underserved. So there's so many needs right now. And if you can actually provide this power solutions, people would, you even have state governments willing to partner with you, because they know that, it's very difficult without private partnership. I'm not trying to, say the public sector or the government, is not trying their best, but unfortunately, they're just not providing, there's just not, power production at the levels that, we would need to fully operate the country. And so, he was able to achieve that PPP with the state government, and we're still working on the transaction. But so far, it's just been very, very, peaceful to see, because I know when he initially came to us, he didn't think it was possible. And now we're helping him raise capital to build the power plant. We've already raised the first tranche, and we're already engaging in the capital raise for the second tranche as we speak. And we're hopeful and confident that we will be successful, so that he can finish assembling the power plant and really just be able to build a power station that can provide power to, the people of his own state. In my own personal career as well, I've also worked with healthcare companies, and particularly a pharmaceutical company that was trying to expand their business. And it was women-led and women-owned. And again, that was just when we were able to close that transaction after many months. And I was actually able to go to some of the sites for the new pharmacies that were being opened. It was also another pinch me moment, because you're literally seeing your work come to fruition. It's very beautiful. Right now, we've also had, engagements with clients in the education sector and even the Nollywood sector that are trying to establish, structures to help fund their projects. So, for example, help fund movie projects. And for me as well, that's something I'm working on, and I can't wait to see, that come into fruition. Because, for example, imagine going to like a movie premiere and seeing that a movie that you helped fund or finance, right? Those are also sectors that I think the creative sector is also one that I think should not be neglected within Nigeria, because it's really one of the driving sectors for the economy globally, and one of the more recognized sectors. And I think it's severely underserved. So that's one sector we are also working on. We're currently working on a fund for that. We have partners, of course, but we're working on a transaction that would help fund, that industry. And the education sector as well, similarly as well. So yeah, those are a few examples of past and, current transactions that you're really seeing your work come into fruition. And it's very beautiful to see. Very motivating is the word I would use.
That is really, I was very excited to hear the creative industry and the education industry, two industries I'm very passionate about, and I think are phenomenal for growth on the African continent just because of how we're seeing it bloom and blossom in the last 2-3 years. So I think it might be challenging in the creative industry, but I
Yeah,
trust emerging Africa to figure it out and, to pioneer some great work in that field.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Um, I'm curious to what has been the most rewarding part of your journey in emerging Africa groups so far.
There's a couple, like including the examples I just gave of, seeing some of those projects that we helped fund and finance being constructed. I think also another moment was when this was a year ago now, when we won the award for just under a year ago. We won two awards, one of which was being the ESG investment. We won the Business Day Banking and Finance Awards for being the leading ESG investment firm in the whole country. And again, that was just a pinch me moment because, imagine this being across the several banking institutions and investment banking institutions across the country, having that our ESG initiatives actually now being recognized, in the industry and people knowing that, oh, emerging Africa is known for being ESG conscious and ESG focused. That was also a pinch me moment. I was actually on the stage when we won the award. I was one of the people that was lucky enough to be present and, sharing that moment. I think another moment would also just be, I've mentioned this, seeing some of the projects that we worked on. Again, it's just because you're literally seeing it, come to fruition. I can't wait to see when we're done with, when, we're working with partners. I would say the partners are also like the driving forces for this fund, the creative fund. I can't wait to see when we're done with that, just to see the projects that are funded. And I would say even our technology fund, more recently, because we've been working on this behind the scenes for many years. I would say at least 2.5 years now. And so people might just see the launch of the fund, right? But there's been a lot of groundwork that has been done with several parties. So I think we had a roadshow and a launch in London last year in November. And we're also planning one as well this year again. But just being able to attend, we've had one in Lagos as well this year and one in Port Harcourt. Well, just being able to attend those launch events, for the fund, where we're speaking to potential investee companies and partners has been a very rewarding moment as well, because you're seeing your work come to fruition. Those are, I would say, the really rewarding moments.
Yeah, that's honestly so good to hear. And I guess as like we'll gradually start like going towards the end of the episode, but then would like to know like in terms of like future outlooks, like are there any like key projects or like strategic directions that Emerging Africa Group is focusing on in the future?
Thank you. So I don't want to give too much detail because again, these are future plans, right? But definitely I will talk about our technology fund. I know I've talked about it multiple times, but it's because it's such a key initiative. And with that technology fund, it's a strategic decision because we're not just targeting, Anglophone West Africa. As I mentioned, we're actually going to also be in Francophone West Africa. So that's Cameroon, Togo, and the Ivory Coast. We're going to be deploying capital to businesses there. And what we found is that over the past couple of years, those regions have been underserved. So when investors come to invest in sub-Saharan Africa or in West Africa, they oftentimes focus on Nigeria, Ghana, the English-speaking side. And those sides also have similar demographics to us. So it's a lot of youth population is incredibly high, and they have a lot of business entrepreneurs. But unfortunately, they are underserved. So that's one strategic decision that we have for the future with this fund. This fund will also target the youth population because a lot of times, oftentimes, technology businesses or technology aligned businesses are led and owned by founders that are, within the youth demographic. So it really would help, empower the youth within this part of the world. And, also that gender lens, focus I mentioned earlier would also help, bridge the financial gap for, females and female-led businesses across Africa. So I'll say that's a key strategic move that we've already announced it, so I can talk about it. But essentially, that's going to be a very, key part of the future of emerging Africa.
We're excited. We're looking forward to it. One, like I'm I mean, I've always been interested in investments and the potential for development, but having heard had this conversation with you, I am more interested. And I'm like, yes, let's do this. And I'm definitely looking out for Emerging Africa Group. And so we are coming to the end of this podcast episode. It's been so insightful for me, and I can imagine for other non-finance background people. And I'm curious, we have this really fun question that we ask. If you could go on holiday anywhere, I think in Africa, at least I remember correctly, what country would you go to and why?
In Africa.
Yeah, it won't be Morocco. We already know.
It won't be Morocco. No, I used to live in Morocco, so I've already gotten the amazing opportunity to explore Morocco. I think right now, probably Kenya. I've never been to Kenya, but I have a close friend who's Kenyan, and he's not just Kenyan in the sense that he lives in the city center. He actually goes to explore the nature reserves and the more rural areas. And I think they have so many natural game reserves, I think, and it just looks so beautiful every time I see videos of them, with the animals. Oftentimes, people think because you live in Africa, you've been to so many safaris and seen all the animals and played in the jungle and played in the wild. But if you live in Lagos, as it's completely different. That Lagos is a metropolitan city, a developed metropolitan city. So we are not, in the jungle. So I would really like to go to the Kenyan safaris and game reserves. They also have, beautiful mountains and very scenic mountains where I think in some parts it almost, I think, snows even or gets really cool. So it would just be beautiful to see those. So I would say Kenya, the nature and game reserves in Kenya is somewhere I would like to go. There are other places that are also very beautiful, but I think I've already explored some of those. So I would say Kenya.
I think Kenya is a beautiful country, definitely on my list of places to visit. I think your friend who is Kenyan and still explores Kenya is extremely cool. Big ups to him. Everybody should be like him in their own country. And I hope you do go, and I hope that it exceeds your expectations, and that you have a great time. And with that,
sorry. Sorry. I just want to say, I saw an interesting fact about Kenya today. I don't know how true it is, but someone was mentioning how like a lot of talented Kenyans stay in Kenya, or at least they go back to Kenya. So it's like in terms of like brain drain, like they barely have it. But I don't know how true it is because I haven't been there. But someone like mentioned it recently, and I was just like, that's interesting.
Oh, that's amazing. I hope Nigeria can be more skilled in that direction in the future. But that's amazing, and I think those are the things that really help grow an economy.
Exactly. But thank you so much, Toni, for your time. Gained so much insight. Like I'm sure Sanni can agree as well. Like there's so much that I've been learned today.
Thank you as well for having me. It's really been a pleasure just to be here with you. And I think what you both are doing as well is, in terms of people actually contributing towards, social awareness, business awareness within emerging markets. I think what both of you are doing is also pretty incredible. So, I think you should also, if I could, I would put both your names up there as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for me.
Thank you, Celine, as well. Thank you. This has really been nice. It's been really, really nice.